One of the questions we've been asked more than just about any other, Rube, this offseason is, when is that DeVonta Smith contract coming? It's here.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but the question I've been asked the most is whether Tyler Steen's more comfortable on the right side or the left side. But the DeVonta question is definitely been out there. And, people were getting a little nervous because the weeks were going by. But this was always going to get done. There's no way Howie Roseman, he's never let an above average young player, or I should more than above average, an elite young player go. It's never happened. It wasn't going to happen this time. A little bit of a tricky negotiation, but he got it done. He always gets it done. This is his strength. This is what Howie is good at, is keeping young players. And he's done it again. You got to get them. And that's been a problem sometimes. You got to get these guys, but once he gets them, he doesn't lose them.
Yeah, big contract extension for DeVonta Smith. This is an emergency Eagle Eye podcast presented by Nissan. Reuben, Frank, and Dave Zangaro. We wanted to pop on here and talk to you guys about this extension. It's exciting news for the franchise, certainly for the fan base. They were kind of waiting for this one. You get the Landon Dickerson extension, you get the Jordan Mailata and the Jake Elliott, and the whole time everyone's going, yeah, but what about DeVonta?
Josh Sweat gets some money. Not an extension, but got some money.
Okay. So you have DeVonta Smith. So basically what happens here is it's a 5th-year option for 2025. The Eagles pick that up, and then it's a 3-year contract extension through the 2028 season. So it kind of picks up after that 5th-year option, which makes sense because that was the Eagles' leverage in this, is that they had the 5th-year option. They get to kind of use that leverage a little bit, but it's still a big payday for DeVonta Smith, $25 million per season in the extension, which puts him right there with A.J. Brown. And that's kind of the only way that this could go.
Yeah, and we talked about where that number might be last week, and I suggested it might be just a tad below A.J. Because A.J.'s a little bit better player, been more productive up to this point. They're not far apart, but AJ is the WR1 clearly. So I'm a little surprised that the number is right there with AJ. But again, AJ signed the deal a couple of years ago, and every year deals are going to go up. So it shouldn't be. I guess 23.5 million per year. So in that same range. And look, it makes DeVonta one of the highest paid receivers in the league. What is he, 5th now, 5th or 6th in average annual? His production hasn't been there, but I don't think either of us would be surprised if he becomes that type of player. So it's a little bit of a leap of faith because based on his production, and this isn't a knock on him, it's just the reality. He's WR2. He's been an exceptional young receiver, but he's not one of the 5-6 best receivers in the league. So he's got to live up to this deal, and he can do that by increasing his production. And I think in a new offense with a new coordinator, I don't see any reason that won't happen.
Yeah, I mean, as far as leaps of faith go, this is a very little leap for me. Like I believe a lot in DeVonta Smith and the player he is, and this is just the nature of contracts. Like they keep going up. And I think it's important that the Eagles got this deal done before Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Ayuk completely, even Jalen Waddle, like all those guys are going to get paid a ton of money. Really, Jefferson and Lamb, who are ahead, like those guys are going to get paid a ton. So I think it's wise for the Eagles to get this done now. We mentioned on the last pod when we talked about DeVonta, like there wasn't a lot of wiggle room between Calvin Ridley and A.J. Brown in terms of annual average salary. So maybe like the negotiation was tricky, but maybe it wasn't that tricky because if it wasn't in this range, it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, you're right. And yeah, I mean, I think it's more of a leap of faith than you just because, look, DeVonta's been really, really good, but just by nature of being the second receiver, you're probably not going to put up 1,500 yards. And I think he's capable of that, certainly. But it's a fragile thing when you have. I mean, and look, the Eagles are now the first team in history with two $25 million a year receivers. That's never happened. So
It'll happen pretty quickly when Jalen Waddle gets his contract. So
that's fair. But look, I mean, the point is, it's not easy to pay two guys at the same position this sort of money, and Howie deserves credit for making it work. A lot of people were tweeting at me and asking, well, how's AJ going to feel about this? I mean, AJ's not going broke here, and I think he understands, and I mean, I think if the number was more than AJ, he might be a little upset. But I'm sure they talk. I'm sure Howie talked to AJ and his representatives during this process. The fact that AJ and DeVonta are super close doesn't hurt. But yeah, I mean, in the big picture, AJ is now underpaid. I mean, it's just that, like you said, that's how contracts work. If the cap keeps going up 10%, 15% a year, this is just going to keep happening. So as long as AJ's good with this, and certainly DeVonta's good with it, there won't be any problems. But it is a potentially tricky thing to navigate for a franchise when you have two guys of this caliber and you're trying to keep them both happy.
Yeah, I think the trickier thing is like how does it factor into your percentage of the cap? Are you now so much in investing in receivers that other positions you worry about? But with the increase in the cap overall, like I'm not too worried about that. And I'm sure we haven't seen the structure of this contract, obviously, but it's going to be backloaded with the heaviest cap years late. That's the way they do all these contracts, with the anticipation that the cap continues to rise, and it does, barring a global pandemic, it continues to rise, right? So this is smart business from the Eagles, and you're right, it's one of their biggest strengths, and it even predates Howie. This is something they've been very good at, and I think it's good for the team to make sure you keep these guys around. But then the smart business side of it is you get in there before you need to do this, right? So you're not trying to rip these guys off. They're getting good money, and they're happy to get that money in their pocket because it takes some of the risk out of their lives, right? They don't have to worry about getting hurt next year, and they get some money, and they're competitive contracts now, but you're also ahead of the curve when you're talking about the receiver money that's going to be coming down in the next 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're DeVonta, if you're any player, the sooner you get that money and make it work for you and invest it, the better off you are. So I think most guys would rather get a little less money earlier so that money can start. I mean, when you put $50 million in an IRA, I mean, it's gonna really work for you. So yeah, and just Howie's so good at it. But you're right. I mean, it really started. Joe Banner was the one that first really kind of, and Joe and Andy, who really understood the value of paying market price for young players and keeping them, and keeping them happy. And that's really continued. I can't think of the last young, like, star type player, and I consider DeVonta a star, even if the numbers don't quite match up to that. I mean, just the eye test says he's a star.
What an internal conflict that has to be for you.
but the point is, I mean, I can't think of a guy that they let go that they wanted to keep, like a younger type player. It just doesn't happen. And you see around the league teams that are forced to, cut ties with really good players just because they can't make it work under the cap. And that's never been an issue here. And it won't be as long as Howie's, running the show.
Yeah, and it's funny because Howie has joked that he doesn't deserve credit for drafting DeVonta Smith. Like, he certainly does, because he traded up. That was the trade back, trade up. And it was at a moment where everyone's worried, like, man, they're moving out of 6. They might not get Jamar Chase. He moves back to 12, but then he sneaks up in front of the Giants and gets DeVonta, and it works out really well. So he does deserve credit. I know he drafted the Heisman Trophy winner, so it wasn't like you don't maybe give a gold star for the evaluation, but you give him a gold star for how we got it done.
Yeah, and I think that's something he's really, really good at maneuvering through the draft and finding maximum value, um, flip flopping picks, trades, um, and with an eye toward the future. I mean, he's really, really good at it. It might be, when you rank Howie's strengths, like drafting is not in the top couple, but maneuvering the draft is, and making it work for him and for the team. And you got to mention Jeff Lurie and all this, who just wrote a check. What was the guaranteed number? 56 million?
51.
51 million. My bad. You're Jeff Lurie. You're just writing these checks. And look, they have a lot of revenue. The TV contract is pretty significant.
I think he's doing all right.
He's doing okay. Yeah. But he's always been so supportive of, and really whoever the GM is, and certainly been some high-priced disasters that Jeff Lurie's written checks for. But Jeff Lurie's never said, no, that's too much money, or if he has, we don't know about it. In fact, that they've never lost a guy that they wanted to keep tells you that he fully supports whoever the GM is and is willing to spend. And man, there was a knock on Jeff Lurie early that he didn't want to spend money, which I don't know where that came from or why, but he spends a lot of money.
Yeah, he spends it. And it's not just the extensions, it's the way they're structured. Like, this will be heavy in, like, I'm sure the signing bonus is going to be pretty big, and that the signing bonus gets turned over immediately. That's a big check that goes to you right now. And then the way they structure with like option bonuses, they do all that for cap purposes, but that means you got to have the cash flow immediately to get those out. And some teams aren't willing to do that. So it is like, it's one of the ways to get an advantage. This is a league that is designed for parity. So there aren't a lot of ways to gain an edge, but that's one of them when you have an owner who's willing and able to have that cash flow and to allow the GM, the contract negotiators, to structure these deals in a way that benefits them and it benefits the team, because they can add more talent and they can push things down the line and they can play this game. It works really well for the Eagles. And you're right. I think sometimes we don't give Lurie the credit he deserves for that.
Where do you think the money is? Like, does he just like does just Jeff Lurie go to like Truist.com or citizensbank.com and just like transferring 51 million from this account to this? Like,
I think he has a giant swimming pool full of gold coins and dollar bills like Scrooge McDuck.
Okay.
And he just goes and like gets a wheelbarrow, fills it up, and gives it to DeVonta.
So he gets paid in bullion? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. Gold bars.
It could be.
I think I'd request like fun things in my contract.
Like what?
Like, I want to be paid in gold. Like, some of my base salary gets paid in gold.
Okay.
It's just power dynamic.
Yeah, I'm not sure your agent would go for that.
DeVonta, let's talk about DeVonta.
I'm going to be paid in Krugerrands.
Let's talk about DeVonta, the player, a little bit. You've talked about the production, and look, the numbers are there in black and white, but I mean, still very productive. Over 1,000 yards the last 2 years, playing with AJ Brown, who has managed to stay healthy, which was a question when the Eagles got him. I mean, DeVonta is just such a clutch player too.
Yeah,
I'm so impressed by this guy. And if AJ Brown was not here, I think we both agree DeVonta's numbers would be considerably better. Like, he would be the wide receiver one, and he'd be a really good wide receiver one, and he'd still get this type of contract.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's why I think the numbers of the contract are, beyond the numbers of the production. I mean, he was 20th among wide receivers last year in yards, and he's 16th since he came in the league in his 3 years. Well, which is good, but it's not 25 million a year good. But I think there's just an understanding of what he's capable of. I think you mentioned how clutch he is, and that's just so true. I mean, on big third downs, I mean, fourth quarter plays, I mean, he's catching that ball in traffic. He's getting hit. He's holding on to it. He's a skinny guy, but he's a tough guy. So I give the Eagles credit because I think a lot of teams would say, we're not paying you to be the, and I don't even know. Like, I guess Justin Jefferson's number one. Let me see here what we have. Uh, Average annual. Um, Tyreek is 30 million. Devontae Adams, a lot of Devontae's is 28 million. Cooper Kupp is 26.7 million. And then AJ and Devontae are 25 million. This is average annual. DK Metcalf, 24. Debo, 23.9. Michael Pittman, 23.3. Calvin Ridley, Terry McLaurin. There's a bunch of guys right around 20 million. I think a lot of teams would say, you're a really good player. You're 20th in the league in receiving yards among wide receivers. You're a 17, $18 million player. And, then you have an ugly negotiation, and then, the player's not happy. The player wants to leave. The player's going to hold down a mini camp. It's just so many bad things can happen. So to pay him above maybe perceived market value or perceived production value, that's huge. I mean, that's a really huge thing. You're keeping the player happy for the rest of his Eagles career by really overpaying him.
Yeah, and you'd rather, if it is an overpay, which it is based on the production. I don't think it really is, but
No,
if you're going to
agree, but I think my point is that some teams would not give him $25 million based on all those things.
Yeah, no, I understand your point. I'm just saying, if you're going to overpay, you'd rather overpay the guy right? Because that's what free agency is a lot of times. It's overpaying. We've seen some crazy wide receiver deals on the free agency market, and you have to overpay there, and you're not getting a player that Like with
Right.
DeVonta, they know what he is. They know he's a cornerstone piece to this whole thing. He's been, I think, like as advertised in just about every way since he's been here. And he was kind of, when they got him in 2021, it was the start of the Nick Sirianni era. They were coming off that terrible season in 2020 where there was a lot of just a lot of messiness with the team. And they viewed DeVonta as kind of a culture setter type of player. And he's been that. He came from a winning program in Alabama. And I think he has instilled a lot of that here since he's been in town.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, he's a quiet guy. You don't think of him as a leader in the traditional sense just because he's so quiet. I mean, you can barely hear what he's saying half the time. But I think by the way he plays the game, the way he prepares, the way he takes care of himself. I mean, we've heard him talk about his routine just before practice. I mean, what he does just to get his body right. I consider him a leader, certainly just by how he does his job, how he goes about his business. And he is, he's representative of the Nick Sirianni era. He was the first round pick after Nick was hired, and he's not going anywhere for quite a while.
Yeah, and look, there were, even though he was a Heisman Trophy winner and he was crazy good at Alabama, I think there were questions about his frame and how he'd hold up. Gosh, he's been tough. Gosh, he's been durable. I mean, that was the one question mark with him. Yeah. It was like, yeah, he's a very polished player. We know he's good, but he did that at college. Can he hold up in the NFL? He's been tremendous, and he has gotten bigger. I think he's put the work in. He's never going to be a bulky guy. Like that's not his frame. Certainly, he's always going to be skinny, but I think he has put the work in to make sure that his slight frame isn't a negative. Right? We've seen him. He looks bigger in the shoulders, especially these days.
Yeah, I still can't believe when we see him in the locker room, just how skinny his legs are. And this guy, sometimes when he's catching those balls with three guys around him, you hold your breath a little bit because he is a slight guy. But you're right. He's got to be. And we talk you look at Allen Iverson, and he just put up the statue for him in Camden. I think DeVonta is the same. Just one of those really little guys who's incredibly tough. And he's not little, but he's just skinny.
I like that comp a little bit, just in terms of toughness.
Yeah. I mean, because the way Allen played the game, I mean, he was driving the lane. That was his game. He was going up against guys who were 6'8", 6'10" all the time. I think he's got. I mean, he would take some threes, but he was like a forward. He was like a power forward at 6, whatever he was. And yeah, DeVonta's the same. He's just got way more toughness than you would think just by looking at him. And yeah, he's and I really think the dynamic between AJ and DeVonta is really cool. It's been really cool to watch them get to know each other, become close. They, when one of them's doing a press conference, the other one's kind of cracking jokes on the side, and there's incredible respect for each other. I think they play off each other really well. They're competitive between each other too. I mean, they both want to be the one that has a 100-yard game each week, or sometimes they both do. But it's a really cool thing, and for a team that went a quarter of a century without any good wide receivers, other than one guy for 21 games who went nutso. To have these two guys now locked up for at least the next few years is incredible. And the other thing is just what it means for Jalen. Like, we haven't mentioned Jalen Hurts, but you have this young quarterback, and he's still a young quarterback who's got 2 elite wide receivers. Whatever else happens around him, you look at like who Carson was throwing to, when he had like that Greg Ward, Travis Fulgham year, Deontay Burnett. Who else were they running out there?
Bryce Treggs, Greg Ward Jr.
I say Greg Ward. Who was that guy? Robert somebody at the end of the year.
Robert Davis.
Yeah. But
they got him J-Jaw.
Yeah. Yeah. So to think we're, Jalen now, I mean, you're investing so much money in Jalen Hurts. Why wouldn't you want to get him every weapon possible? That's the other thing. Like, if you let DeVonta go, or don't want to pay him what he's worth, or what his value is, what's that doing to Jalen Hurts? If this team's going to go to a Super Bowl again and win it, Jalen Hurts has to have those kind of weapons, and now he does, and he's got to be thrilled.
Do you think Carson's sitting in Kansas City right now going, wait a second, you guys drafted J.J. Arcega-Whiteside and Jalen Reagor for me. Jalen Hurts takes over. You draft DeVonta Smith and then trade for A.J. Brown.
I'm sure there's some of that. I mean, I'm sure that, how can you not? But I mean, he's probably just happy to have a job.
Yeah.
And know he's going to get another Super Bowl ring as a backup again. But
that's the nice thing about DeVonta, though. It's like you went through J-Jaw and you went through Jalen Reagor, and it had been so long since they nailed a pick of that position. So to finally nail it and to get a cornerstone guy, like, that's why we were never worried about this deal. Like, they were going to make sure he didn't leave the building.
Yeah. Yeah. It was never an issue. I mean, it was going to happen. It was just a matter of when. Yeah.
All right, let's take a break and we'll finish up on the other side.
You deserve a car that thrills you, a car that puts goosebumps on your goosebumps. At Nissan, we got everything from turbocharged SUVs to 100% electric vehicles that'll make your heart beat faster. Experience the thrill for yourself and shop your local Nissan store at nissanusa.com today.
Celebrity cook Steve Martorano brings his Italian-American cooking back home to Philly. Enjoy Martorano's Prime at Rivers Casino and Steve's famous meatballs with Sunday gravy, prime steaks, and more. Make reservations at Martorano's Prime on Open Table. Okay, Rube, so here's a list of the players the Eagles have under contract through 2028. Jalen Hurts, Landon Dickerson, Jake Elliott, Jordan Mailata, and DeVonta Smith. That's good work.
That's good work. Some cornerstones of the offense. Nobody who signed the longest on defense. If you have that,
I could look that up for you.
But yeah, I think it. I mean, if you're Kellen Moore, you're coming in. You've got two cornerstone offensive tackles signed forever. You've got two wide receivers signed. You got your star quarterback signed. You just signed a potentially great running back. Goddard's still under contract and still a good player. We'll see how, what kind of year he has. But I mean, this offense is primed to be really, really good for a long time.
In terms of like veterans under contract in 2026, you have Bryce Huff. Nolan Smith will still be under contract as a rookie, and CJ Gardner-Johnson, right? Yeah. 3-year deal.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but you look at, I think the defense is still a work in progress, and there's a lot of questions there still, certainly. But on offense, this offense has a chance to be great for quite a while. And even as bad as last year was, they, and I sound like Nick, but they were the number 7 offense in the league after the Buffalo game. And obviously things went bad. They still finished 11th, I think.
Top 10.
So with
top 10 offense.
If Kellen Moore is what they think he is, and I think he's going to be pretty good. There's no reason this can't be a top 5. It should be a top 3 offense in 2024. It really should be.
Yeah, and I think they're kind of counting on that. And we've talked before.
And it might need to be. Yeah.
Yeah. We've talked before about which players might benefit most from Kellen Moore being here. And DeVonta has been the guy at the top of my list because I don't think they've utilized his skill set the way that we even saw it at Alabama, right? Like, and the lack of motion in the offense. I don't want to hyper focus on one element because I don't want to hear from Nick Sirianni about it anymore, but it was one element that's clearly been missing in the Eagles offense. We saw Shane Steichen go to Indianapolis, and all of a sudden their motion rate's way higher than the Eagles. So it's like, okay, this is a Nick thing. And I understand his point that motion for motion's sake is not worth it, but it can help. And DeVonta Smith was somebody that in college really benefited from it. So if Kellen Moore brings that element to this offense, I think DeVonta is a player who can see some bonus production from.
Yeah, and I think if those numbers don't go up, then we know Kellen Moore's, it's not really his offense. It's still Nick's offense, but I think they will. How good can DeVonta be? Where do you see his ceiling?
All pro. Like I think he could be one of the best receivers in the league.
Yeah, I agree. I
see no reason to even put a ceiling on him. Because the one we mentioned the slightness. The one other question I had about DeVonta was, and this is going to sound silly, but I wondered how much room for growth there was with him because he was so polished coming out of college. But I've seen that growth from him in the 3 years he's been in the league. So I have a lot of faith in him that he's going to continue to get better.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And there's only one ball to go around, and like AJ is going to have his 1,400 yards, 1,400 to 1,500 yards. I do think I'll be surprised. I'll say this: I'll be surprised if DeVonta's not over 1,200 yards this year. I think he has. I think he has a 1,500-yard season in him, and maybe one of the things Kellen Moore is going to do, maybe he feels like this offense is more dangerous if their numbers are balanced, and we'll see. We'll see how that goes. I still think AJ is as good as any receiver I've ever seen around here, and that includes Mike Quick and T.O. And Don Looney. Yes, Dave, Don Looney is in that mix too. But yeah, I don't think DeVonta's far off, and I think there could be years where DeVonta's numbers are right up there with AJ's, and maybe they're both at 1,300 or something like that. But yeah, he's still a young guy. This will be his third coordinator in 4 years. I'm expecting huge things from him.
Yeah, there's no reason not to. I don't really have anything else on DeVonta. I think he's a good player and he got paid.
I wanted to ask you what's next. Like, do you see any other? I mean, how is really? I mean, he handled the Hassan Reddick thing, maybe not to everybody's liking, but he did get the Eagles out from that. He found a solution. Like you said, he's gotten Jake Elliott signed. Um, he got C.J. Gardner Johnson back. He signed Saquon. Mulata got his contract. Landon Dickerson got his contract and his lawnmower. You see any other pressing needs? And we got a week and a half before the draft, so that's coming up next. But what else do you see? Any other priorities?
No, I mean, this was the last big, like, obviously the draft is going to happen for every team. Like, it's a big part of the talent acquisition phase of the offseason. So they're going to draft players. But this was the last big item on the to-do list. And it was kind of the last big thing hovering over the team. And they could have gone into the season without it resolved, and it wouldn't have been a huge issue. But we know the Eagles' MO, and we knew they wanted to get this done. So certainly not a surprise that it did. In terms of extensions, like, I think we talked about Milton Williams before. He's one guy I'd be interested in extending. I don't know if he would, like, he might be, but I don't know. That's a trickier negotiation because, he's kind of been a part-time player. Even though he started a bunch last year, he's really a part-time player. His production fell off last year. I thought he played very well. He's the type of player I'd want to keep around, but it might be in his best interest to play out this season and to show that he deserves more money. But that's the last one that I would kind of think about.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I'd be surprised if unless they give him more money than I expect. I think he might be the kind of guy that he knows that he's never going to be the guy here, and he might want that opportunity somewhere else. I could see him leaving. For a chance.
I mean, he might not be the guy, but there's a lot of benefit to playing with Jalen Carter.
No, there's no question about it. But I'd be a little surprised if they do something. But he's a good player, and certainly you'd rather keep him than not.
Yeah, and this is kind of, we've talked about this before. This is kind of the way Howie views the roster. It's not a one-year roster. It's always looking down the line. What do we have in 26? What do we have in 27? What do we have in 28? He's already thinking about 29. Like, it's kind of the benefit of having a general manager with this much staying power, is that he's not GMing to keep his job this year. It's all about the future. And as long as the GM is okay and doing a good job, like, that's a good situation.
I think that is so valuable. Just, it gives him such a luxury of playing the long game. Like the Reddick trade. I mean, he knows, there's no immediate payoff with that pick, and it won't be for a couple of years. But I think when you have that, that security, you can make decisions that are best for the overall health of the team in the long run, and that's a really valuable thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right though. There's no longer like a super pressing item.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So we will talk to Howie actually this week, which I'm looking forward to. Probably won't learn anything, but we'll talk to him about.
About the draft.
Yeah, talk to him about the draft, and then I'm sure we'll have another podcast very soon.
All right, let's wrap this up. If you enjoy the Eagle Eye podcast, please do us a favor. Rate and subscribe wherever you get your pods. If you're watching on YouTube, click the like button, subscribe there as well. If you appreciate the extra emergency podcast, the easiest way to repay us is to go ahead and leave a 5-star rating and a nice review. That's all. For Reuben Frank, I'm Dave Zangaro. This has been Eagle Eye, presented by Nissan. We'll talk to you.